Have you ever sat in an English class and just wondered why it sells like a tour through a literary cemetery? You know, Shakespeare, Fitzgerald, Salinger. They're brilliant, for sure, but they're also, well, very, very dead. That feeling is right at the heart of a huge battle that's been raging for decades over the books we're told are great. Welcome to the Canon Wars. I mean, it's a totally fair question, right? We live in a world that is just overflowing with news stories and so many diverse voices. So why do we keep going back to the same old classic texts? This one simple question, that's the spark that ignites this entire fiery debate over what we should all be reading and maybe more importantly, why. Okay, so let's start with the traditionalists. For them, the classic literary canon isn't just some dusty old bookshelf. No, it's the very foundation of our culture. They argue these books have survived for a reason, and understanding that reason is the whole point of a real education. Now, just so we're all on the same page, what exactly is the literary canon? Well, you can think of it as the greatest hits list of literature. It's the collection of books that scholars and critics have over a long, long time agreed represent the absolute peak of artistic and intellectual achievement. The first big argument for keeping the canon is all about pure objective quality. The idea here is that these books aren't on the list because of who wrote them, but because of what they are. They are, quite simply, masterpieces of the written word, a testament to timeless artistic genius. And nobody championed this idea more than Harold Bloom, probably the canon's most famous modern defender. He argued that things like politics and identity are totally irrelevant. For Bloom, a book makes the cut based purely on its artistic merit, its cognitive power, and that exuberance of diction. It's about the art, and only the art, period. Okay, the second big argument is about shared culture. Think of it like this. For us to have a real, meaningful conversation as a society, we kind of need a common set of references. The scholar E.D. Hirsch called this cultural literacy. Reading something like Hamlet or The Great Gatsby gives us all a shared vocabulary of ideas and allusions to draw from. And this, from C.S. Lewis, adds another brilliant layer to the argument. He basically said that reading old books is the best way to challenge the assumptions of our own time. It gives us some critical distance from our modern biases and keeps us from getting trapped in, the echo chamber of the present. But then, starting around the 1960s, this powerful wave of criticism began to seriously question these foundations. And this was more than just a debate. It was a reckoning. It asked a really tough question. Who actually built this foundation? And who got left out in the process? And this gets to the very heart of the critique. When you actually look at the traditional canon, you just can't ignore the demographics. It is overwhelmingly dominated by authors from a very, very specific background: European, white, and male. And critics argue, pretty forcefully, that this is no coincidence. So this brings us to the fundamental disagreement, the two competing stories about the canon. Is it a pure meritocracy, where the best books just naturally floated to the top? Or is it the product of structural inequality, a system that for centuries literally denied women and people of color access to education and publishing, silencing who knows how many brilliant voices? And that brings us to this staggering number: 35. According to the National Council of Teachers of English, the high school reading list has basically been stuck in a time warp for 35 years. It just goes to show you the incredible power of institutional inertia. Once a book gets on the list, it is really, really hard to get it off. This table really lays it all out, side by side. The traditionalist view values aesthetic genius and wants to achieve cultural literacy. The critical view, on the other hand, prioritizes social relevance and representation, and their goal is to achieve critical literacy and decolonize the curriculum. It's a fundamental clash of values. Now, this whole conflict builds to one of the most interesting parts of the debate. A key defense of the canon is that its themes, love, loss, betrayal, are universal. But critics started asking a really pointed question. Are they really? Or is that universal experience actually being viewed through a very specific and, frankly, very Western cultural lens? So this is the difference between a universal and a pluriversal view. The universal argument says that a story about betrayal in ancient Greece speaks to a timeless human truth for everyone. The pluriversal argument says, okay, yeah, betrayal is something we all deal with, but the experience of it is shaped by our unique cultures, and our literature should reflect that incredible diversity of experience. Okay, so with this intense conflict, how do educators actually move forward? I mean, where do we go from here? Well, the answer isn't necessarily to just burn the old books. Instead, a new, much more practical framework has emerged for building a curriculum that can speak to all students. It's called the Windows and Mirrors framework, and it's such a simple but really profound idea. Students need mirrors. That's books where they can see their own lives and their own identities reflected back at them. This creates a sense of belonging. But they also need windows, books that let them look into the lives of people different from themselves, which is how you build empathy. A great curriculum has to have both. And here's what that actually looks like in practice. It's a model called thematic pairing. So instead of just teaching The Great Gatsby in a vacuum, you can frame it as a window into one very specific version of the American dream. And then you pair it with mirrors, like texts from the Harlem Renaissance, that explore that exact same theme, but from a completely different and equally valid perspective. This whole shift leads us to a brand new way of thinking about the canon itself. Its purpose is evolving. It's no longer seen as this sacred, untouchable list of books. Instead, it's becoming something very different, a useful and highly specific educational tool. So here's the evolution in a nutshell. The old defense was all about transcendent, timeless genius. The new purpose, it's to use these classic texts as a historical anchor. They provide a baseline that we can use to measure our own society's progress, our ideas, and yeah, even our own blind spots. And this idea really gets to the core of that new purpose. Think about it. If you want to critique a culture or push it forward, you first have to understand the traditions that shaped it. The canon is that foundation. It's the set of ideas that modern writers and thinkers are constantly responding to, building upon, or, yes, even rebelling against. Which leaves us with this final, crucial question. The Canon Wars today aren't really about destroying the foundation anymore. They're about deciding what kind of structure we want to build on top of it. What new voices, what new stories, and what new ideas are going to define the literature of the future? That's the conversation that's happening right now.